Hello and welcome to the Regional Export Distribution Centre Expression of Interest webinar. My name's Simon Gatley. I'm from the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning, and I'll be facilitating today's session. In opening the session today, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The purpose of today's session is to provide further advice and information to interested parties who might want to submit an expression of interest for the Regional Export Distribution Centre. So, as a quick overview of our agenda today, we'll begin by providing an overview to the probity process that will support this EOI. We'll then provide an overview of the opportunity for the Regional Export Distribution Centre, and then we'll have a couple of presentations about the EOI process and provide you with some information for following when making a submission of your EOI. Throughout the session today, we'll be answering a number of the questions that have been pre-asked that we've received, as well as those that come through live. And in the case that we don't get through all of those questions by the time the session is due to end at 3 p.m. today, we will be making all questions and answers available via the Qtenders website, which is the secure online tendering system for the Queensland Government. Those questions and answers will be up within 5 business days. I'd like now to introduce you to the panel that we have here today answering the questions. From right of screen, we have Elton Miller. Elton is the Executive Director of the Rural Economic Development Team within the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. In the centre of screen, we have Michael Allen. Michael is the Director of Project Development, Major Projects and Property Group within the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning. And on the left, we have Chris Laserve, who is the Director of the Industry Partnerships Group within the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning. Please note that the purpose of today's session is to provide information and clarification for interested parties who may be interested in making an EOI proposal as part of this selection process. We will not be giving advice at any stage about how to develop an EOI or about how a project plan for an export distribution centre may be arrived. Those are matters for each of the proponents to consider in their own circumstances. I'd now like to introduce you to Peter Bruton. Peter is from Origin Capital Group Proprietary Limited, and they trade as Argyle Corporate Advisors. The state has engaged Peter's services to provide a probity advisor for the duration of the selection process to make sure that it is fair, transparent and equitable. As probity advisor, Peter and his team will be acting as independent observers to the selection process for the Regional Export Distribution Centre. Peter, if I can ask you.
Thank you, Simon, and good afternoon. There are some important probity requirements for this meeting, and I need to share those with you. Proponents have had the opportunity to email clarification questions. These will be addressed by the state agency panel representatives today. If proponents have other questions, they should be asked in accordance with the question and answer process of which Simon has made you aware. The meeting is not a negotiation session. The state may choose not to answer a question or may answer related questions with a single response. If a question is responded to and it materially adds to the content of the EOI document in relation to a matter, the response will be made available to all proponents through Qtender. A proponent should not seek outright endorsement of a concept being considered in its EOI response or seek comparisons with competitors' proposals. Responses to questions are provided with the intention of facilitating the meeting. However, information which is material to a proponent's proposal should be formally confirmed through the question and answer process set out in the EOI document. Nothing included in this webinar alters the terms and conditions set out in the EOI document. Finally, if you have any probity issue or concern which you would like to raise, please do so today through a question or directly contact me post this meeting. My contact details are in the EOI document at clause 4.8.
Thank you, Peter. I'd now like to ask Chris Laserve to come up. As mentioned, Chris is the Director of the Industry Partnerships Group within the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning. And Chris will be providing an overview of the opportunity. Chris.
Thank you, Simon. Today I'd like to provide a broad overview of the Regional Export Distribution Centre initiative. As part of building a strong and sustainable agricultural industry, the Queensland Government has committed to providing up to $10 million, excluding GST, to support business case development and, if feasible, construction of an export distribution centre in regional Queensland. The funds will be provided from the $150 million Jobs and Regional Growth Fund. The invitation for expressions of interest was released on the 14th of August and is available from Qtenders, the state secure online tendering system. We're now seeking proposals from interested parties capable of developing and operating such a centre in regional Queensland. Proponents may form partnerships or submit individually to lodge an expressions of interest. Expressions of interest, or EOIs, need to be lodged by 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 2nd of October 2018. Export distribution centres are dedicated facilities that generally offer temperature-controlled warehousing and specialised handling of products ready for export. They coordinate biosecurity, transport, logistics and delivery of the products and administer export regulation procedures. The state's objectives. The state's objectives for the project include support the development of a commercially viable distribution centre located in regional Queensland, able to handle multiple products and delivery destinations over time. The objectives include the ability to increase the volume and value of produce exported from Queensland to overseas market via air freight. To encourage and leverage investment in agricultural, processing, logistics and related industries. To grow regional jobs and to bolster the resilience and profitability of regional Queensland agricultural producers by facilitating the development of alternative export-oriented revenue streams. The opportunity. The opportunity has two components. Firstly, there's the funding to develop the business case, and if the business case proves feasible, receipt of the balance of funding to construct the distribution centre. The opportunity is available to proponents that have the capability to successfully develop and operate the distribution centre in a regional location and do not have a current application seeking funding from the Jobs and Regional Growth Fund for a project which is substantially similar to the distribution centre. The distribution centre may serve as a pilot for future opportunities for export distribution centres in other regional areas. If proponents express keen interest in the export distribution centre concept and based on the proposals received, there may be future rounds of funding support. However, no decision has been made on potential future rounds at this stage. States' requirements and preferences. I'd like now to move to some critical information contained in the invitation for expressions of interest document. Section 3 on page 8 of the invitation outlines the state's objectives, the state's requirements and the state's preferences. These will form the basis of the evaluation criteria for the EOI. I've just spoken to the state's objectives. In addition to maximising the achievement of the state's objectives, the state has mandatory requirements which are set out in section 3.4. The proposed distribution centre must be located in an area outside of the following local government areas: Brisbane City, Gold Coast City, Redland City, Logan City, Ipswich City, Moreton Bay Regional, Sunshine Coast Regional and Noosa Shire. The proposed distribution centre must use air freight to transport Queensland agricultural produce to overseas markets and connect with, or have a planned pathway to connect with, a regionally based airport with international export capacity. The centre must also incorporate some biosecurity treatment and inspection facilities as relevant to the products to be exported. Biosecurity facilities for exports are regulated by the Australian Government under the Export Control Act. The centre must also have strong prospects for commercial viability for the distribution centre without ongoing government financial support. And finally, it must incorporate a commitment to handling products on behalf of third-party users to contract for the service on reasonable commercial terms. And finally, I'd like to cover off on section 3.5 relating to the state's preferences. These are not mandatory criteria, but the state will also take into account the extent to which a proposal achieves the following preferences. The distribution centre must be constructed and commissioned as soon as possible so that it can effectively serve as a pilot for future opportunities for regional export distribution centres. Construction should commence no later than 2 years after the closing date. Products handled by the distribution centre should be predominantly Queensland agricultural products. The proposal should include exporting products to existing international markets with existing relevant trade protocols. The distribution centre will have the capacity to expand volumes, product lines and export markets to meet demand. The proponent should have experience in project development and operation of a similar distribution centre. And ideally, the proposal will incorporate innovation in design and operation. And that the proponent or third-party investors make a financial contribution to the cost of completing the business case and constructing the distribution centre, or can demonstrate that additional investment will be leveraged as a result of the state's funding contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for that overview. Just a reminder that the speech bubble is below there, so if you have any questions throughout the session, please do click that bubble and ask any questions that you may have. We're now going to dive into some of the questions that have been asked already, and this one relates to location. Michael, I'll throw this one to you. The question is, does the distribution centre need to be located at or near an airport?
Thanks, Simon. So the answer is no. So it's not necessary for the centre to be sited at an airport, although we clearly need to understand how the export produce will be transported between the distribution centre to the airport. So the feedback we got through the registration of interest process indicated that it was pretty clear that we would limit commercial potential if the state requires that the distribution centre is sited at or near a regional airport. So the EOI now just simply states that the distribution centre must be located in a regional area of Queensland. As Chris just mentioned, outside of that list of local government areas that is given in section 3.4.
Thanks, Michael. Another question that we have that's closely related to that one. What is meant by the requirement that the centre must connect with a regional airport? Does the airport need to be a partner in a proposal?
Again, so the proposal needs to be very clear about which airports would be involved in the logistics chain, and it must include at least one regional airport. So in order to export freight, the airport needs to be designated as an international airport through Commonwealth Government, and that includes all the necessary infrastructure, customs facilities, biosecurity controls, etc. So if the regional airport is not currently an international airport, then the proponent needs to outline how that airport plans to achieve this designation and the time frame for doing that. We know that not all regional airports are set up with immediate international export capacity, but we also know that many are in process of obtaining that necessary designation. What we're seeking here is a description of how the export produce will be exported via the regional airport. If that airport's not export ready, then we'll need to see some evidence of the airport's development plans, including approval pathways, financing requirements and other factors such as timeframes to achieve that. In terms of who's involved with the proposal, such as partners or service providers, this is a matter for the proponents, but we'll certainly want to be assured that proponents have had discussions with an airport.
Great. Thanks for that, Michael. The next question I've got here is agricultural related. So Elton, I'll throw this one to you. What agricultural products are being targeted for export, and will non-agricultural products be accepted as part of a proposal?
Okay, thanks Simon. In terms of agricultural products, there are no target products specifically. The state's aim is to boost rapid access to Queensland's fresh or time-critical agricultural produce to key international markets. Based on current trends, likely export produce would probably include anything from high-value fresh fruit and vegetables, seafood, packaged meat, and even cut flowers, but that list is by no means exhaustive, but they're examples of what could be being exported. In relation to whether non-agricultural products can be part of a proposal, the answer is yes. This initiative is focused on exports, but there's no restriction on other products. The state recognises that the availability of agricultural exports will vary with seasons and seasonality and may be affected by other factors such as drought, natural disasters, disease and demand in export markets. However, the key requirement is that the distribution centre is commercially viable.
Great, thanks Elton. Chris, the next one we have here is related to proponent co-contributions. I'll throw this one to you. The EOI does not set specific amounts for proponents to contribute to the cost of a business case firstly, and then construction of a distribution centre. What's the state's expectations for a proponent contribution and leveraging investment?
Thanks, Simon. Look, just to be clear, this question relates to the state's preferences. There is no mandatory requirement for proponents to contribute funding. In terms of maximising the state's objectives, we hope proponents will put forward robust commercial proposals, which will include innovative ideas about running a commercial export distribution centre in a regional area. Proponents who can demonstrate their commitment by outlining what they are investing financially or in kind to develop the proposal will present compelling EOIs. Similarly, proposals which can show that they will leverage further developments will put a strong case forward for how their proposal will meet the state's objectives. That is, for spreading the benefits across the region, enhancing productivity and creating jobs. The EOI is not specific on these requirements because ultimately the proposals need to be commercially viable. What the distribution centre looks like, who is involved, and whether there are related projects, these are all matters for the proponents.
Great. Thanks for that, Chris. I'm now going to provide a bit of an overview of the EOI process for you. So as you'd be aware, the state has selected a competitive selection process for the Regional Export Distribution Centre initiative. There was a strong degree of interest, as Michael mentioned, from the registration of interest, and that's further been shown by the number of questions that we've received and the diversity of organisations that have submitted questions in advance of today's webinar. The state wants to ensure that all interested parties are able to pursue the opportunity and be considered fairly on their merits. The invitation for expressions of interest, as Chris mentioned, was released on the 14th of August 2018, and it can be accessed via the Qtenders website. As mentioned, Qtenders is the state's secure online tendering system and the mechanism through which all communications between the state and proponents will be directed up until the EOI closes. This is to ensure fairness, transparency and symmetry of information that's being provided to proponents at all times. You will need to register for the Qtenders website if you have not done so already. This is because all information updates, addendas to the Regional Export Distribution Centre expression of interest will be provided to proponents via the Qtenders website. And once you're registered, you'll automatically receive those updates that are uploaded on the Qtenders website. So I encourage you to do that if you haven't done so already. The questions, if you have any questions in relation to the EOI process, there's a couple of email addresses that are on the Qtenders website. There's one for Philip Sabin. Questions to Philip should be regarding the functionality of the Qtenders website. If you're having any issues with the site, direct those to Philip in the first instance. For all other questions related to the EOI process, if you could send them to the REDC pilot email address that's on the Qtenders website, they will respond in a timely fashion. You can also call the Qtenders contact for any general inquiries that you have about the Qtenders website. However, to keep dealings fair and transparent, the project team will not be accepting telephone calls or having any verbal conversations with proponents during the EOI process. This way, all of the state's answers to questions will be made available and to proponents through the Qtenders website. If you think that your question is commercial in confidence, please specify that as part of the submission or email that you're providing to us, and we'll deal with it accordingly. Further information about the Q&A process, as Peter mentioned, is outlined in section 4.2 of the invitation document. You'll need to submit your EOI responses via Qtenders before 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 2nd of October 2018, but there's a little bit more later in the presentation about that. Once the EOI responses are in, they'll be assessed by the evaluation panel. Section 4.5 of the invitation document describes how proposals are assessed and against the criteria that they will be assessed. The three criteria are up on your screen now as part of the presentation, and they are the form of the distribution centre, the capability and capacity of the proponent, and feasibility and the benefits. The state may invite proponents to attend an interview to discuss their proposal. Let me be clear that these interviews will not be an opportunity for proponents to reinvent, add or change their proposals in any way, shape or form. They will be subject to strict protocols and attended by the state's probity advisor, Peter. At the end of the evaluation, there are a couple of likely scenarios for outcomes, one of two being that the state selects one successful proponent and that proponent receives funding to support preparation of a business case. In the second circumstance, where the state receives multiple high-quality submissions, there may be a circumstance where multiple proponents are requested to proceed to develop a business case and receive funding for that. Whether there is one proponent or multiple proponents selected, the state will require those proponents to enter into an assistance agreement. The invitation document attaches at the back a draft of that which includes a lot of the terms in what the agreement will hold, and so you can anticipate the terms of any possible offer that you receive at that point in time. After the EOI process closes, there will be no further dealings with the Qtenders website. The successful shortlisted proponents will deal directly with the department, including the submission of their business case. We'll provide more details about those contacts closer to the time. The business case will be assessed to determine whether the distribution centre is a viable proposition. Essentially, we'll be looking at if it stacks up financially, that it meets the state's objectives, and that it won't require ongoing state funding post-construction. Only one proponent will be chosen to receive funding to support the capital works for the distribution centre pilot. The maximum amount of funding that that proponent can receive is $10 million. This includes funding for the business case and construction. In the circumstance that more than one proponent is chosen, the unsuccessful proponent business case will be funded from a separate funding pool. So it won't be drawn down from the $10 million that's required for the business case development and the construction of the successful proponent. If the business case is satisfactory, The successful proponent will again be required to sign an agreement with the state for the capital funding works. The agreement will be similar to the one that is provided for the business case development. However, it may include, or will include, requirements linking it to the achievement of the state's objective. For example, requirements around employment, third-party access for the distribution centre and such. So that wraps up the process, an overview of the process. On your screen you can see a couple of key dates. The closing date for questions and answers as part of the expression of interest process is the 21st of September. The closing date for the EOI submissions is, as I stated, 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 2nd of October, and late submissions will not be accepted. So we'll now dive back into questions because we've got a few more here that we need to get through, and I'm conscious of time. So Michael, I've got one for you here regarding scheduling. I'd like to hear about when construction needs to commence and finalise.
Yeah, well, timeframes are really a matter for proponents. However, in order for this to serve as a pilot for the Export Centre initiative, we'd like to see the distribution centre constructed and commissioned as soon as possible. And we understand project development timeframes can vary depending on a range of things, including development approvals and constructability issues and financing. Also, we need to take into account that proponents will need some time to complete a well-considered business case. As we've said in the EOI, the state's preference is that construction commences no later than 2 years after the close of the EOI. And ultimately, the target dates for the business case and construction will be negotiated between the department and the successful proponent.
Thanks for that, Michael. We've got a question for you, Chris, that's come in online. Can you clarify what does handling of products mean?
Thanks, Simon. This means receiving the products in whatever state is appropriate, such as chilled or frozen, and then moving the product through the logistics chain to the export destination.
Great. Thanks for that, Chris. Another one for you relates to the Jobs and Regional Growth Fund. Is the EOI process using the usual Jobs and Regional Growth Fund criteria for assessing applications, or is this process different?
Look, this EOI process is different, and the terms and conditions of this EOI process are set up wholly within the invitation for EOI. The Regional Export Distribution Centre EOI process is looking for similar outcomes to the Jobs and Regional Growth Fund in terms of creating employment and promoting economic development. However, proponents who have previously submitted applications to the Jobs and Regional Growth Fund should be aware that this process is different.
Thanks, Chris. Elton, one for you on use and access. What does a commitment to handling products by a third-party user mean?
Okay, what it means is the state will not support exclusivity. One of the state's key objectives for this initiative is to increase the volume and value of Queensland's ag exports. This aim will only be achieved if the Export Distribution Centre is open to handling as much produce as possible to meet overseas demand. It is not the state's intent to support a proposal which benefits a single operator or one group of operators. Proponents should expect that if selected, they'll be required to demonstrate their business cases provide for handling freight from any third party. So that means the state expects proponents will act reasonably in setting prices for services to third parties.
Thanks, Elton. I'd now like to invite Danielle Kelson up to the lectern. Danielle's a member of the project team within the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning, and she'll be providing an overview of the requirements for making a submission of an EOI. Danielle?
Thank you, Simon, and I'm really happy that everyone who's dialing in today has interest in our project. The state is really keen to achieve its objectives for the project and is seeking high quality EOIs from appropriately credentialed proponents. and we've attracted a great deal of interest from many and varied proponents across the state. The EOI documentation has therefore been developed to elicit responses from you that are detailed enough for a robust, competitive selection process, but are not too prescriptive. We want to encourage innovation and responses that are tailored to your regions, to your produce and your potential export markets. The schedules, which is the business end of the EOI if you like, all appear at the back of the invitation document. Schedule 1 contains the terms and conditions of the EOI. I don't want to gloss over these, but I also don't want to bore you by going through all of them. I do need to stress that these are important and that you should read them carefully. Schedule 2 is a deed of acceptance. This is an acceptance and documents your acceptance of the terms and conditions to us. We require that a signed deed of acceptance be submitted at the same time as your response to the EOI, or it will not be considered a compliant submission. It is important that you sign the deed of acceptance correctly, otherwise it will not be binding. For a company, this means that it must be signed in accordance with the Corporations Law or signed by someone with the requisite authority to bind the company to it. Where a proponent has more than one entity involved, so a joint venture or consortia, each of those parties must separately sign a copy of the execution page and submit that with the deed of acceptance. Schedule 3 contains the response forms. This is where you give the information that will be the basis of your proposal and has been developed, these have been developed against the evaluation criteria. Response form 1 is a checklist. That's just so that you know you've put everything you need to in for a compliant EOI submission. Response form 2 is a declaration. You will need to read this carefully before you sign it, as it must be completed to suit your individual circumstances. It's a statement to us that you have complied with the terms and conditions of the EOI set out in the invitation document and that you've put your best foot forward in your EOI submissions. It also contains a direct declaration of conflicts of interest. What these are is explained in more detail in section 4.8.3 of the invitation document. Response forms 3, 4 and 5 list the questions about your proposal for the distribution centre and align directly with the evaluation criteria. We ask that you respond to all of these questions as best you can, as your responses will form the basis on which your EOI will be assessed. The questions have been designed to bring out what we hope is the level of detail required to measure your proposal against the state's objectives, requirements and preferences. The last schedule is a template of the assistance agreement. So moving on to response form 3. This is where you tell us about the distribution centre that you envisage, where it is, what are its capabilities. We're after metrics and particulars and scopes of work, practicalities like scopes of work and requirements. You are asked to describe the target products, the export markets, the airports that will be used by the centre, your project development plan and the key project stakeholders. Response form 4 is about you. This is where you tell us what your skills, experience and resources are, what your capacity is to apply these to the development of a distribution centre. We are seeking information about your intended business structure, the entities involved, the experience of your key personnel. We are asking for case studies or other examples of your experience, and we are interested in your financial capacity. Please note that after the evaluation process is complete and before entering the assistance agreement, we will be conducting due diligence on the selected or shortlisted proponents. Response form 5 goes to the commercial viability of the proposed distribution centre and the extent to which the benefits generated will meet the state's objectives, requirements and preferences. We are asking for information here about project costing, your project financing, a risk analysis and a description of the projected benefits of the proposal. At the end of Response Form 5 is a guidance. The guidance has been provided because as part of your response to Response Form 5, you will be required to submit a cost estimate about the business case completion. It will need to be supported by quotes from contractors or consultants, and the guidance is designed to help frame the scope of works required to obtain these quotes. It's a minimum requirement for a sufficiently detailed business case to form a view on the feasibility of the project and thus for the award of the remaining $10 million grant. The last of the schedules to the EOI is a template assistance agreement. This does not need to be signed or submitted as part of the proposal. What it is an example to show you what terms and conditions will apply to the grant for the business case funding. It may be important for you to read through these terms and conditions in order to frame your EOI proposal, because it will outline for you that this is a reimbursable grant, which means there will be no upfront or advance payments made. Finally, I'd just like to cover off on how you make a submission. We have repeatedly said today that the portal for doing that is the Qtenders website. EOIs can only be submitted electronically via this website. The tender number for this EOI invitation is REDC EOI. Please note, Qtenders will not accept files above 100 megabytes in size. If your EOI is larger than that, you will need to separate it into multiple files to allow them to be uploaded. You can upload as many files as you need to. You will get a receipt of acknowledgement from Qtenders when your submission has successfully been loaded. Your EOI proposal must be in by the due date and time, which is 5 p.m. on the 2nd of October. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Danielle. We've got a few more questions to get through. This next question for you, Michael, relates to the questions in the EOI document. This question reads, I can't fully answer some of the questions in the EOI form because the answers are open-ended or because the arrangements are still being developed. Will this be a problem?
Thanks, Simon. We recognise that some proponents will have proposals which are a little bit conceptual or preliminary, while others might be a lot more advanced in their development. The process, we think, has been designed to accommodate this as best we can. However, all applicants are encouraged to provide as much detail as possible. You could, for example, note how you intend to provide any particular set of information further during the business case stage. And the project development plan that's submitted with the EOI can also set out how and when you intend to firm up delivery arrangements.
Thanks for that, Michael. Oh, sorry, did you have...
Just to sort of make it clear at the end, really, that the bottom line is we need enough information to properly evaluate the proposals.
Okay, thank you. Chris, one regarding proponents and potential partnerships. Can an EOI be submitted by a group which has not yet formed a partnership or consortium?
Yes, look, that's possible. We recognise that it can take time to form partnerships arrangements, and that parties may wish to confirm that the business case is satisfactory before formally establishing those arrangements. However, proponents will need to be able to demonstrate that they have a clear execution plan for any partnering arrangements, and that all parties are committed to the project.
Thanks, Chris. Elton, one regarding export markets. This one reads, will government provide information on international export markets and existing trade protocols which can be used to answer the questions?
Okay, thanks. We can't supply customised information. In order to be fair and equitable, Government agencies will not provide customised data or information for a proponent's project. However, government agencies like Trade and Investment Queensland can provide publicly available information if required.
Thanks, Elton. One here that I've got, Michael, regarding South East Queensland airports. Question to you. Can produce be exported via the Brisbane airport?
Yeah, good question, Simon. So the answer is yes. However, the proposal must also demonstrate a connection with a regional airport. We understand certain products may need to be treated using biosecurity facilities in South East Queensland and therefore need to be freighted via Brisbane Airport. We think it's detrimental for viability to a proposal if it's prohibited otherwise. However, the Regional Export Distribution Centre initiative is targeted at growing Queensland's regional economies, so therefore we'd like to see proposals which will increase the capabilities of regional Queensland.
Thanks, Michael. Elton, one regarding biosecurity. What are the expectations for biosecurity equipment as part of any distribution facility?
Okay, yep. This will need to be customised for each proposal. So, for example, a proposal could include installing something like vapour heat treatment equipment to ensure products comply with export market access protocols. Such equipment costs would be eligible for funding. However, the operating costs of such equipment would not be eligible. Proposals for low-tech aggregation facilities will not satisfy the state's requirements relevant to export state's objectives, as well as proposals that do provide all necessary biosecurity services. Each proponent is responsible for complying with all biosecurity requirements relevant to exporting and for securing all necessary approvals, licences and permits for from the appropriate regulatory agencies.
Thanks, Elton. Chris, one for you. We've heard about air freight today. I've got a question here about the export method and regarding seaports. Can products be freighted via seaports?
Yes, but only as a supplementary operation. This initiative aims to improve rapid access to export markets, so the focus is very much on air freight. If handling freight via seaports can complement the air freight operations, then these volumes should be incorporated into the proposal. However, sea freight certainly shouldn't constitute the majority of the export volumes.
Thanks, Chris. One regarding EOI submissions and the release of information within those. Will any information in the EOI submissions or the business case be released publicly by the government? Michael, are you able to answer that one for me?
Yeah, so I guess the default is that EOI submissions will be treated as confidential under the terms of the EOI process, and they won't be published by the department. So once a successful proponent's been selected, the assistance agreement will include confidentiality provisions. This is to protect the commercial and confidence information of the proponent, and its customers and potentially other stakeholders that may be involved. However, the business case might also include some more general information which is not proprietary to any company. And if state funds have been used to develop this information, there may be value in the state making it publicly available at some point. However, the state and proponent will need to consider what and in what form information that could be released on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks for that one, Michael. Just a reminder that we still are taking questions, so please use the question button at the bottom and send those through. They are coming through, so thank you very much. Elton, I've got one here regarding new international markets. Can new markets which currently don't have trade protocols be considered?
Yes, they can, but only as a long-term expansion plan. It's essential that the key export markets for the distribution centre have trade protocols currently in place. This is because of the lengthy process involved in establishing new trade protocols. However, markets which do not have protocols in place currently but will have them set up in the coming years can be considered as part of a proponent's plan for future expansion.
Thanks for that, Elton. Chris, one for you on local markets. Can products be sold into local or interstate markets?
Thanks, Simon. Yes, it's acceptable for the distribution centre to handle produce for the domestic market. Some produce may also be shipped to other domestic destinations on its way to export markets. However, whilst domestic markets can be included, the proposal cannot be solely or even primarily domestic. The state's view is that export markets offer significant opportunities to grow the volume and value of Queensland's agricultural industries.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Michael, we've had a couple of questions relating to supporting infrastructure for proposals as well. So the question reads, can proposals include requests to fund upgrades to supporting infrastructure, such as intersections, bridges, telecommunication networks, or as part of the project funding?
All right, yeah, well, we certainly want proponents to demonstrate they've considered what impacts may be on infrastructure with their proposal. Generally, it's a matter for proponents to identify what might be needed, when it's needed, and the cost of any upgrades that might be needed. So proponents will be responsible for securing all the necessary development approvals, construction permits and licences as may be required. If infrastructure upgrades are needed, it would be useful to show that you've had discussions with infrastructure owners or regulators. It's possible for a proponent to include infrastructure upgrades as part of the capital works to be supported by the state. However, this would have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. And as previously mentioned, the total state funds available to a project can't exceed $10 million. So any capital works upgrades that are necessary for the project must be considered within that $10 million.
Okay. Thanks for that, Michael. Chris, one relating to the panel that's being involved as part of the selection process. Who's on the selection panel for the EOI?
So the EOIs will be evaluated by an evaluation panel comprised of officers from the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning, the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and also Queensland Treasury. The evaluation panel will also be able to draw on external advisors as required. For example, advice may be sought from technical, commercial and legal advisors or specialist government officers such as from Trade and Investment Queensland. Any person who is involved with the evaluation of the EOIs will need to comply with strict probity requirements for this process.
Thanks for that, Chris. Elton, one for you regarding federal government programs. How does the program compare to the federal government's recently announced Small to Medium Enterprise Export Hub program?
Yeah, this initiative is not part of any initiative of another jurisdiction, including the Commonwealth Government. So these are two separate programs. However, the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries is running the Growing Queensland's Food Exports program, which is a complementary program to the Regional Export Distribution Centre initiative. The Growing Queensland's Food Exports program is targeted at working with food production and processing businesses to grow exports into existing and new overseas markets. So these two initiatives are complementary. And it's aimed at, this initiative, the current one, is aimed at improving the rapid delivery of those products to the export markets.
Thanks for that, Elton. We've got one last question that's come through, and I think there's, so if there are any other questions coming through, please do send them through, because we're coming to the end of the questions that we've got through. Chris, this one relates to the Jobs and Regional Growth Fund, so I'll direct this one to you. The Jobs and Regional Growth Fund targets certain regions. Is this the same for the Regional Export Distribution Centre expression of interest?
So this EOI has specific criteria for eligibility, which are different to the usual Jobs and Regional Growth Fund guidelines. From a regional perspective, the distribution centre needs to be outside of those areas that are listed in section 3.4 of the invitation for EOIs.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Chris. We're just getting through some other questions here. Michael, that's one that's come through. It relates to back to the airport. If you could just read out the question there, Michael, as well.
Okay, so the question is, does each proponent need to have a regional airport as a partner? Well, the answer is no, clearly. So that one, as we said earlier, each proposal needs to be associated with a regional airport, but doesn't necessarily have to have that airport as a partner in the proponent team.
Thanks, Michael. So that wraps up the questions that we've received here today. In conclusion, I'd like to thank the panel members and the project team behind the scenes for all their efforts today. And thank you for the time, taking the time out of your day to join us for this live webinar stream. Please take note that this recording will be provided by Wednesday the 5th of September on the project's webpage, which is the Department of State Development's website, dsdmip.qld.gov.au/export. As mentioned earlier, the questions that we've answered today will be uploaded onto the Qtenders website also, the questions and answers, so they'll be up there. And also, so if you have anyone interested in viewing today's session, you will be able to do that and view all those questions as well. A reminder that the closing date for the questions for the EOI process is 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 21st of September 2018, and that the expression of interests close at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 2nd of October 2018, and no late EOIs will be accepted. So thanks again today for your attendance here and joining us, and you're interested in the Regional Export Distribution Centre program.